Last week, we heard an unknown host interview Dr. Mark Harwood, an engineer, on his thoughts on the age of the Earth and the Bible. This week, he gets into the nitty-gritty. He tells us the evidence that he has that the Earth is a mere 6,000 years old, or at least he thinks he does. This one took considerable work, as some of his evidences go off the beaten path. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Last week, I passed the 6,000 subscriber mark. Thank you so much to all of you. How fitting that I now address a video from a guy who thinks that the Earth is only as old as the number of subscribers that I have.
Here we are, about 6,000 years after the creation. Now, that's a bombshell. I mean, 6,000 years? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, most people would say that.
Yes.
And by most people, you mean 97% of the scientific community and 80% of the general population. Pew Research, as far as I could find, hasn't addressed this question directly, but did find 31% of the population deny evolution, at least to the extent that they say humans have always existed in their present state. However, when the question was rephrased to a single question with three options, one being humans evolved over time, guided or allowed by God, then only 18% that humans have always existed in their present form. The National Center for Science Education, in a 2009 survey, asked if God created the universe, the earth, the sun, moon, stars, planets, animals, and the first two people all within the last 10,000 years. Again, the wording of the question made a huge difference in the results, with 39% agreeing with this statement, but only 18% saying that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. When asked if the continents have been moving for millions of years, 80% agreed. So I think it's safe to say that less than 20% of the general population agree that the Earth is under 10,000 years old. But when confronted with how that fits into their theology, some will give conflicting answers. Pew Research further divided rejection of evolution by education level, finding that the less educated a person is, the more likely they will reject evolution. I postulate that the trend would hold for the age of the Earth as well. This also further supports the reason that the host found the need to reiterate the simple thought expression for the audience in last week's video.
Wow, Lord, there's got to be some evidence of that. But you know there is.
Yes.
There's enormous amounts of evidence for a recent creation.
Yes.
It's just that people don't know about it, but that's the sort of thing which is on our website.
It feels like a big claim, and it feels like, well, a big claim, it needs some big support.
With you on that one, brother, whoever you are.
Absolutely.
So could you give us some of those? I mean, obviously people can go to the website and they can find out those.
Sure.
Creation.com/age, was it? Or 101?
Yeah. Creation.com/age.
This is the third time they've referred people to their website. Are they ever going to get on with actually saying something?
Could you just give us a few of them to start us off?
Now even the host is begging Harwood to get on with it.
It'd be worth just spending a little bit of time on that, because radiometric dates get so much weight put on them in our culture.
As they should. We use radiometric dating to find oil. You know what consistently works to find oil? Radiometric dating.
So what you can do is test how good the dating methods are. Now, in order to do that, you need to have a rock of known age.
So that takes the assumptions away, like earlier we were saying.
Absolutely. So now you've got
minutes.
your historical record, you see.
No, that is not what you need. You need multiple dating methods and methods to test the underlying assumptions.
How do you get a rock of known age?
Yeah.
Well, a really good way is to take a rock from the lava dome of a volcano with a known eruption date.
Got it. It's just been solidified, so you know.
Yep.
Someone saw it. It's a historical record.
That's right. So there's an historical record with a date. So we now know exactly how old the rock is. So people have taken rocks from the lava dome, for instance, of Mount St. Helens. It erupted in 1980. And rock from the lava dome was dated various samples using the potassium argon dating method. And people got anywhere from 350,000 years to 2.8 million years old.
Wow.
There are multiple problems with this claim. First, the limitation for potassium argon is 4.5 billion to 100,000 years. To test a rock with potassium argon dating on a sample you know is under 100,000 years old is a waste of time and effort. It's like putting a book on a meat scale and expecting to get an accurate result. You won't. The scale wasn't designed to measure something that size. You need the correct tool for the task. Using the wrong dating method, one that wasn't intended for the time scale, will yield you the wrong results. And here's the source paper for Harwood's claim. It's by Dr. Steve Austin, who does have a PhD in geology. Much of the paper is written for the professional geologists, and portions of it were beyond my comprehension. Simplifying his work, he sent samples he took from Mount St. Helens to a lab to measure argon levels and test the dates of the rocks. When a volcano erupts, argon escapes while it's in its liquid form. When the rock hardens, it contains no argon. Wait a million years and some argon will have formed from the decay of potassium-40 to argon-40. The sample from Mount St. Helens should have had no argon in it, and these dates should not have been the results. So why were they? Austin would have us believe it's because the dating method is faulty. He suggests that argon does not all escape when rock is in a molten state, and thus the presence of argon isn't a valid thing to test for. He concludes that potassium-argon dating is unreliable. His paper is published in Creation Ex Nihilo Technical Journal, a source that only allows articles from people who agree to their theology. Thus, any peer review of the article is limited to creationists. The National Center for Science Education sent a group of geologists to the Institute for Creation Research and questioned Dr. Austin about his finds. I will quote extensively from their findings. Austin sent young, low-potassium rocks to Geochron laboratories. Such samples are very low in radiogenic argon, which is the isotope responsible for the radioactive decay that is the basis for the dating techniques. Although Geochron specifically stated that it did not want to deal with young, low-potassium samples, Austin sent them anyway, and specifically stated in his paper that he did not reveal the origin of the samples. This omission can result in potentially large ranges of error in the results and opens his research to ethical questions. Second, Austin may have dated some of the solid material that came up with the lava rather than the lava itself. Austin had mentioned that the lava contained xenoliths, pieces of solid rock that came up with the lava. Although Austin stated that he was careful to remove the xenoliths, we have no assurances that he succeeded, and he apparently made no effort to date the xenoliths separately. The peer review process of a mainstream geology journal would have demanded that he explain his unusual results more completely. Therefore, contamination by rock that is 350,000 years old or older remains a possibility. Third, some of Austin's previous forays into radiometric dating of rocks demonstrate that he is not an expert in this field. Austin is the head of the ICR's Grand Canyon Dating Project. As such, he is committed to casting doubt on the radiometric ages of the lavas in the Grand Canyon. In a 1992 publication, ICR Impact Number 224, Excessively Old Ages for Grand Canyon Lava Flows, Austin asserted that he found Cenozoic, relatively recent, lavas that gave radiometric ages of 1.34 billion years. These assertions are completely debunked by Chris Strassen's criticism of the ICR Grand Canyon Dating Project at Talk.Origins archive. Strassen points out that Austin's Grand Canyon lavas came from different flows, and the ages of the flows may actually represent a minimum age for the mantle that served as a source material for the flows. Despite the obvious problem with Austin's methods, Impact Number 224 is alive and well and available at the ICR Museum. At the end of the presentation, Austin was confronted by another member of our group who asked, "Whatever happened to Stuart Nevins? Does he still publish anymore?" Those of you familiar with ICR literature may recognize the name from tracts published in the late 70s. Austin admitted that he had published under that pen name. So much for his recent Mount St. Helens-induced conversion to creationism. So Austin, the source for this claim, fraudulently claims to have converted to young Earth because of Mount St. Helens, yet was publishing creationist articles 10 years before the event. If he is lying about his personal history, what makes anyone think he is being truthful about sending pure lava samples to the lab? The fact that these results have never been verified by anyone, nor similar results been obtained by any other geologists, casts great doubt on their validity.
But the point is, you shouldn't get such an extraordinary range of very old ages for something which is known to be much younger.
Exactly, which is why a reputable scientist would have repeated the process, probably with a different lab. The claim was made at one point that two separate labs verified these results, but the paper itself makes no such claim, nor does Austin. When Mary Schweitzer found soft tissue in dinosaur bone, it was such an unusual find that she questioned her results. When repeating the procedure led to the same result, she published. Her peers originally said impossible, but when they used her method for stripping away the mineralization, they yielded the same result as well. If Austin was right about his claims of argon dating, other geologists should be able to repeat his process and get the same result. To date, no one has.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So there are a number of others. There's a couple of volcanoes in Hawaii, Kilauea and Hualalai,
Yeah.
each of which erupted approximately 200 years ago. Various ranges of ages, anywhere from up to 22 million years, or one was dated between 160 million and 3.3 billion years old, and they're about 200 years old.
So people have done this a lot. It sounds like, I mean, they must be creationists that are going to these sites and they take the rock samples and they send them away to laboratories.
Yeah,
Is that how it works?
but it's not only creationists. I mean, the geologists want to know the ages.
Yes.
And they come across a lava flow somewhere, and they send it off to be dated, usually potassium argon for lava flows. They want to have confidence that these results are good. But if you get unreliable results for things that have a known age, how can you have confidence in the results you get for things of unknown age?
First, sending rock samples of recent origin for study by potassium argon testing is worthless, as the sample can't be dated by this methodology. So to imply that scientists do this all the time, whether creationist or not, is just patently false. There is so much wrong with these claims that it's hard to know where to begin. The volcanoes Harwood referenced in Hawaii, Kilauea, and Holloway have active volcanoes that have erupted multiple times. Geologists date rocks from different lava flows. When the flows are uninterrupted, the dates of the rocks from two different layers guide archaeologists that any fossils or artifacts found between the two flows will date to between the dates of the lava flows. But not all lava flows form neat layers like this. Some flows enter fissures, causing them to mingle with prior lava flows. Thus, one challenge to the geologist is to first determine which lava flow your rock originates from. So for Harwood to characterize the dates of volcanic rock from these lava flows as being of a known age is patently false. There are many different lava flows on these islands with various ages. The oldest rocks from Kilauea are obtained by underwater submersible and date to 275,000 years old. The youngest rocks are on or close to the surface. They range from modern to 22,800 years and were all dated by carbon-14 testing, not potassium argon. The article on creation.com argues that unusual levels of argon being found in rocks from the Hawaii lava flows cast doubt on potassium argon as being a reliable dating method. It argues that excess argon must come from the Earth's mantle, and thus the founding assumption of there being no argon in the rock at formation is false. However, excess levels of argon are well known to geologists as an occurrence in lava flows. This 1968 study discusses one source and concludes the data indicate that the amount of excess radiogenic argon-40 is a direct function of both hydrostatic pressure and the rate of cooling, and that many submarine basalts are not suitable for potassium argon dating. The point being that, again, more than one dating method is needed to produce an age of high confidence. In researching this, I went to several of the source articles for the creation article, and there were several that explained the different reasons for finding unusual levels of argon in various rocks. I learned about popping rocks, and no, it's not a candy. It's a particular complex region of the mid-Atlantic ridge that contains heavily faulted terrain with intact blocks of deep crust, some of which contain argon. and thus the cite from the creation.com article. You know what I didn't find? Any geologist who wrote articles concluding that potassium argon dating was called into question by these finds. The only references to articles that reach such a conclusion are all written by two geologists, Snelling and Austin, the two that work for creation.com. It's a complex topic and I couldn't understand all of it, but what was clear to me was that the only people that look at the data and come away with the conclusion that the testing method is faulty are those that presuppose that the testing method was faulty before they looked at the data, because their theology told them to do so.
But there's something else you can do. You can test different dating methods on things which must be about the same age. So let me give you an example. In Queensland, there's a mine where about 20-something metres down, a drilling discovered a basalt layer from a lava flow, and it had passed through a forest and there was charred wood still there. So the basalt was dated using potassium argon at 45 million years. The wood was carbon dated at something like 45,000 years, a factor of 1,000 different, but they must be at the same age because the lava has flowed through the forest.
The paper that Harwood is citing debunks itself. It says, normally fossil wood found in such an ancient basalt would not be radiocarbon dated because the wood would be considered too old for any radiocarbon to be left in it. The paper also said that they didn't tell the lab where the sample came from, which in itself is a red flag. Next, had they done so, the lab would have informed them that carbon-14 is an inappropriate test for such a sample, as the age of the sample is beyond the scale that carbon-14 can measure for. Finally, I don't see how any geologist could say with a straight face, okay, we don't know what expression was on the face of the geologist when he wrote this article, but you get the point, that the wood was too old for any carbon-14 to be left in it. That's not how half-lives work. When one half-life period ends, that amount of carbon-14 remaining is half of what was there at the start. At the next half-life, 1/4 of the original sample remains, or half of the half, and so on, and so on. You never reach zero carbon-14 in the sample, as each half-life merely cuts the amount left in half again. You do reach the point where the amount left is so small as to be unmeasurable, thus the limits of the testing method. But the geologist should know that that amount is never zero. But then again, our so-called expert is an engineer, not a geologist. I don't know whether or not he knows this, but if he doesn't, he shouldn't be speaking as if he were a geologist and knows what he's talking about.
And to be fair, no serious scientist relies solely on a radiometric date.
Thank you. So if you know that, why do you pretend not to know that the alleged testing of the dating method your people used was invalid?
Right.
For these very reasons, the uncertainty of the assumptions behind them.
That is a mischaracterization. Yes, there are assumptions that must be accounted for, but you make it sound like scientists know radiometric dating is faulty, and thus they confirm with other dating tests. Nothing could be further from the truth.
So geologists, for instance, would always do what they call a field survey. They will look at the layers of rock above and below the relevant sample, and if, for instance, it's above a layer which is generally accepted to be 200 million years old and one of the results comes back more than 200 million, well, they'd reject that because it's above that layer. So it can't be that old, it must be younger.
It's not that they just reject it, it's that they realize there was likely a problem, either a contamination of the sample, an inclusion of an older piece of material in the sample, or some other reason for the faulty result. I can't speak for geologists, but for the most part, the data that isn't in line with their expectations isn't merely ignored, it is questioned as to why it is different. If the answer is contamination, then it is ignored, as it was just a faulty test. But what is done with the data depends entirely on the reason for the deviation. Harwood paints a picture of geologists as a conniving gang to cover any data that they don't want the public to see, so that they can push a narrative that they know is false. Currently, there are about 15,000 geologists in the United States alone. The creationists have two, Austin and Snelling. If there was a conspiracy among geologists to hide the evidence of a young Earth, it would have to be the best-kept damn secret in the history of conspiracies. No, wait. Actually, there is one that is greater. The one that they claim by biologists, paleontologists, and geneticists, all supposedly covering that humans have only existed for 6,000 years. Now, that one is a bigger one. So, okay, it's the second biggest conspiracy in history.
I'm not trying to be critical of scientists because I am one.
Are you? The Dean of Engineering at Boston University begs to differ.
But what it reveals is how our belief systems work, because we filter all the evidence we get in accordance with what we already believe. So if I've signed up for the naturalistic worldview, the evolutionary story.
Where is this sign-up sheet? I certainly haven't seen one. This claim is laughable, as there is no worldview that one must hold to in order to be a geologist. But one must sign a statement of faith to work for a creationist organization or to publish on a creationist platform. Project much?
You cull your data. Now, that has an interesting effect. It means that everything that gets published aligns pretty closely with the paradigm.
Again with the projecting. It's the creationists that only publish what aligns with their paradigm.
So the peer review system simply preserves the paradigm.
Absolutely false. Because creationists who are legitimate peers, that means you aren't an engineer trying to peer review a geology paper, can do a peer review on a secular paper. But the reverse is not true. Secular scientists are not welcome to review anything done by a creationist.
The river systems around the world today dump about 20 billion tonnes of mud and sediment onto the ocean floor every year. Now, we can take an average depth of mud and sediment. We can calculate approximately how much is there. We know the rate at which it's being added to, so we can place an upper limit on the age of the ocean floor. And it turns out all of that sediment at the current rates, right? We're just taking a process, which we observe today, we're winding it backwards. And all of that would have got there in less than 12 million years.
Interesting.
Now, that's a disaster for the evolutionary story, because the oceans are supposed to be at least 3,000 million years old, not just 12.
Harwood again demonstrates that he has no idea what he is talking about. Ocean sediment disproves the evolutionary story? What on earth does ocean sediment have to do with evolution? He meant to say that he thinks it proves the age of the Earth can't be young. We'll get to that in a minute. But the fact that he considers the age of the Earth and evolution to be one and the same, that biology and geology are one and the same, just goes to show how little he understands of his own topic. The answer to his question is the rock cycle. The ocean sediment builds, it hardens into ocean crust. All three rock types in the Earth's crust, igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic, can also be recycled back to their original molten magma form. This process occurs when the oceanic crust is pushed back into the mantle at subduction zones. As old oceanic crust is subducted and melted into magma, new oceanic crust in the form of igneous rock is formed at the mid-ocean ridges and the volcanic hotspots. This recycling accounts for the recycling of 60% of the Earth's surface every 200 million years, making the oldest recorded oceanic crust rock roughly the same age.
Then people might say, yes, but it's too long for the biblical account of only thousands of years. So you've got to go back to the historical record. So is there some event in the historical record in Genesis that might have dumped billions of tons of mud and sediment on the ocean floor? And you guessed it, the flood, right? So when you have the true historical record of the history of the Earth, we have the basis on which we can interpret the evidence we see.
If you believe in the fairy tale of the flood, which has been proven not to have happened by multiple scientific and historic disciplines. Add to that a bit of magic and presto, I can pretend the rock cycle doesn't exist, and that my paradigm holds. Just add magic.
There are stacks of those. The rate at which the continents are being eroded would mean that the current continents would erode down to sea level in just 25 million years. How come they're still here,
The rock cycle. You really should check out the rock cycle. It's pretty cool.
The moons of Jupiter, back in 2018, they discovered another 12. They were interesting because they were what are called retrograde moons. They orbit Jupiter in the reverse direction from all the others, which rotate around Jupiter in the same direction which Jupiter itself is spinning on its axis. So that's a bit interesting. That's another story. But in this group of 12 going backwards, there's one going forwards. And so In the article in the journals, the scientists said this is an unstable situation. Head-on collisions would quickly occur and grind the objects down to dust. But they're not dust; they're still there.
That line comes directly from the Creationist.com article, which is quoting Scott Shepard, the head of the team that found the moons, in the publication Carnegie Science. Now, as Paul Harvey used to say,
the rest of the story.
Here's the article in Carnegie Science. It's possible the various orbital moon groupings we see today were formed in the distant past through this exact mechanism. The team think this small oddball prograde moon could be the last remnant remaining of a once larger prograde orbital moon that formed some of the retrograde moon groupings during past head-on collisions. Because of their sizes, 1 to 3 kilometers, these moons are more influenced by surrounding gas and dust. If these raw materials had still been present when Jupiter's first generation of moons collided to form its current clustered groupings of moons, the drag exerted by any remaining gas and dust on the smaller moons would have been sufficient to cause them to spiral inwards towards Jupiter. Their existence shows that they were likely formed after this gas and dust dissipated. Further, the orbits of these moons is 550 days. The larger Galilean moons that are closer to Jupiter orbit in 1.8 to 7.2 days. Thus, the existence of the smaller moons of Jupiter are no more an issue for cosmologists who understand the universe is over 6,000 years old than the alleged issue for the geologist. How old are these outer moons? We don't know yet. But even if they were a mere 6,000 years old, that would have no bearing on the age of the rest of the universe.
So just how long can you fly upstream in amongst all these other moons with an orbit that crosses their paths and not collide? So what it says is those moons orbiting Jupiter have not been there for 4.5 billion years, lucky to have been there for 1 million years.
Where did you get that figure from? Let me guess.
Now, the evolutionists can always make up a story, and they'll make up a story that says, well, maybe there was a collision nearby and the debris got captured in Jupiter's orbit and ended up in this nice circular group going the wrong way, except for one which is going the right way. But anyway, let's move on.
Number of specific collisions I think are needed, yeah.
It's a long bow to draw.
Yeah, got you.
And I don't think it's really a plausible explanation at all.
So he knows the rest of the story. What he doesn't seem to get is the layout of the moons. I'd like to know on what basis he rejects cosmologists' explanation of how these moons came to be. His study of satellites? I'll grant that there is some overlap, but certainly not enough to accept his word for it that the Carnegie team is in outer space.
Far more likely that the creator made it that way so that there's an indelible stamp of his creative genius on the moons of Jupiter, showing us that they were recently created.
So Harwood thinks the fact that one of Jupiter's outer moons has been rotating counter to the rest is a stamp of God? It's God showing the scientists that he's there and he made all of it? If that was his goal, he would have been better off stamping "made by God" on the surface of the planet in every Earth language. Now that would be evidence of God. And considering that Jupiter doesn't even have a planet surface like Earth does, that would be all the more miraculous. Imagine being able to look up at Jupiter with a simple telescope and seeing the words "made by God" up there. That would really settle the question. Too bad your God lacked the imagination to come up with that one.
Saturn's rings are decaying away at an alarming rate. The Cassini space probe passed through the rings multiple times towards the end of its life. And the results are that scientists believe, secular scientists, that the rings cannot be more than 400 million years old. So there's no really plausible model for how they formed. Here they are, and they're decaying rapidly. So there are some things that are very discordant with the evolutionary story.
And again, he confuses secular scientists with evolutionists. For someone who's supposed to be an expert in satellites, you would think that he would get that space has nothing to do with evolution. Why does he think the rings of Saturn need to be as old as Saturn? The gray hair on his head isn't as old as he is. In fact, most of the cells in his body have all been replaced numerous times, making parts of him much younger than other parts. If his body can do this, Why think the planets, which are also constantly changing due to space particles, can't do the same?
But things which perhaps are more directly related to the biblical age, look at the population of the world today. It's about 8 billion people, as recently estimated. Do you know when I was born, the Earth's population was 2.5 billion?
Wow.
And when I was doing my postgrad work, it was about 4 billion. And now it's 8 billion. So how long can we keep on projecting this? And you go backwards. Now, here's the problem, you see. If you look at the number of people that survived the flood, and there were 6 people who then populated the world, Shem, Ham and Japheth, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, and let that population grow at the rate of about 0.5% for 4,500 years, you end up with 8 billion.
Actually, you end up with 117 billion. If you're thinking, now wait a minute, Granny, that means that we have an even greater problem than what Harwood is presenting. It isn't, because the population growth rate of Earth has not been uniform over the years since the alleged flood. The Industrial Revolution caused a population explosion. Scientists estimate that the growth rate for the population before 1800 was 0.04% annually. And don't forget that a significantly large portion of Europe all died in the 1300s from the plague. The population of Earth in 1800 was 1 billion. If you use a 0.5% growth rate to the present, you only get 3 billion today. He's not even right about the growth rate for his own lifetime. Population of Earth was 2.5 billion in 1950. A 0.5% growth rate for 73 years would put us at 3.5 billion, not 8 billion today. So he's using a false claim of uniformitarianism, the very thing that he accused the geologists of.
The discovery of carbon-14 in dinosaur bones and in fossils everywhere, the remains of living things consistently show the presence of carbon-14. Carbon-14 has a relatively short half-life, about 5,700 years, so quick that you really would not expect to find or be able to detect carbon-14 for more than about maybe 60 to 80,000 years to be able to, be down to maybe a molecule, and then that's going to ultimately decay away as well.
According to the American biology teacher, the recent discovery of radiocarbon in dinosaur bones at first seems incompatible with the ages of millions of years due to the short half-life of radiocarbon. However, evidence from isotopes other than radiocarbon shows that dinosaur fossils are indeed millions of years old. Fossil bone incorporates new radiocarbon by means of recrystallization and, in some cases, bacterial activity and uranium decay. Because of this, bone mineral, fossil or otherwise, is a material that cannot yield an accurate radiocarbon date except under extraordinary circumstances. Mesozoic bone consistently yields a falsely young radiocarbon date of a few thousand to a few tens of thousands of years, despite the fact that it is millions of years old. Science educators need to be aware of the details of these phenomena to be able to advise students whose acceptance of biological evolution has been challenged by young Earth creationist arguments that are based on radiocarbon in dinosaur fossils.
A lot of those examples you gave were employing the same tactic of uniformitarianism.
Yes, they were.
So he even recognizes the flaw in his own arguments.
So really, we're coming back to the beginning of our conversation, which was there isn't a way to measure age apart from a written record.
That's exactly right.
So when we're looking at these evidences, you can paint them one way or the other, and you can choose which one you want. And so I guess what you're saying is, like, you've mentioned all of these, and maybe many people have not heard of any of them, but the ones we get told are the ones we get told in school, on our newspapers, in our magazines, on our TV screens, in our museums. We only get told the one side of the story that uses certain assumptions to get these large ages.
Yes.
But what you're demonstrating is that actually we can use the same idea of uniformitarianism and get young ages. We just need to look at different things.
The problem is the different things. You are looking at a book of myths from an ancient people group, and the rest of us are looking at the 80% of us that recognize that people from ancient Assyria didn't know more biology than modern biologists, geology more than modern geologists, cosmology more than modern cosmologists, history more than modern historians, and so forth. The evidence. How can you not see that if you need to reject the data and research from multiple fields of study in order to hold to your interpretation of theology, the more likely error is your interpretation of theology? It's not like you have to give up God altogether to understand these things. I did, but many Christians do not. They believe in both God and that education, the media, research, science, history, and so on are in agreement. This young Earth view is going the way of flat Earth. It belongs in the nutter conspiracy category. What's really sad is people like Harwood are still failing to see this. And worse, they lead people like our host here to deny all that they learn, to distrust the majority of their education in favor of a theology that doesn't even demand that they do this. Live your life. This week, a fresh hot chocolate chip granny cookie goes to Data Jack. Thank you, Data Jack.